Hi, today we're speaking with Hazel Hatch, and we're talking a little bit about some of the background and some of the works that we're presenting in Revelations, our latest exhibition at the UNB Art Center. So welcome, Hazel. It's wonderful to see you. It's been a very long time.
Very long time.
So we're just going to get started. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are? Let's go back first before we
Right.
go forward. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your artistic background, a little bit where you're from, the kind of schools you attended, where you grew up, anything you want to tell us about your history.
Okay. Well, I was born in Ontario, but I grew up in Fredericton basically from the time I was 2 until the time I was like in my 20s. And I grew up like, oh, I'm the artistic one in the family, but was discouraged like lots of other kids because you can't really get a real job. So I finished high school in academic prep for, science. And I did a year and a half of science degree before I just could not continue anymore. And then I switched over to NBCCD in Fredericton, the craft college, which was where I really that was some of the best years of my life, actually. It was a really great school to be at to sort of develop yourself creatively. Then from there, I went to finish a BFA at NASCAD and came
Was
back
that
to
in
Fredericton for a couple
photography
of
as
years.
well? Sorry,
Pardon?
was it photography as well?
Yes, it was. Yeah, in photography. I came back to Fredericton for a couple of years when we did this show. And then I ended up doing a master's in fine art at the University of Wales in Aberystwyth. Then I came
What
back.
brought you there?
Pardon?
What brought you there?
Oh, it's kind of a weird story. I just happened to see their brochure in the NASCAD office, and I had visited the town there with my sister, like on vacation. Like she was doing school in England, and I went to visit her, and we were just thinking, oh, let's go to Wales, for something to do for like a couple of days trip. And we ended up going to this town, and we just thought it was beautiful and amazing. And so I go back to NASCAD, and there's a brochure for, University of Wales School of Art. I was like, oh, okay. So it just seemed like destiny, I guess.
Okay.
And yeah, that's actually where I met my partner, is when I went there too. So
Okay.
yeah.
Good things.
Yeah, so that's sort of where my art background has come from. Yeah.
Okay.
And now I'm living in London with 2 little kids and wife. My sister also lives with us. Big family.
That's
Yeah.
great. That's great. Things are very busy, I'm sure, especially right now.
Oh, yes.
What sparked your interest in visual art and communication initially? You said you were the artistic one in the family, but you know, where did that come from?
I think that it might not be obvious, but I have a hard time speaking to people. I get very nervous. I have a hard time speaking with people, and for me, art has always been a way of communicating things that are very difficult for me to put into words. Like I find, especially talking about emotional topics, very difficult for me. And so art is kind of a way of talking, or even just like screaming without having to just worry about how I sound, you know?
Yes.
And I've actually been I've just started exploring an autism diagnosis for myself. So when I look back at that, it really makes a lot of sense for me that this is what I gravitated towards, was a more visual language.
Okay.
And my son, who is also autistic, is an extremely visual learner, and I see so much of myself in him. So,
Okay. An interesting mirror then.
yeah.
Wow. So where do you get your inspiration from? So for example, let's talk about Les Attitudes Passionnelles, the work that we're profiling in Revelations.
Right.
This is really, really interesting. Your ideas have fascinated me, and rereading the brochure that you sent me, thank you for doing that. It
Oh,
really
no problem.
reminded me of what an intense experience that was,
Yes.
visually, for us as the spectator, but it must have been tremendously intense for you as the producer of that work.
Well, the inspiration for that, and for a lot of my works, I've always been drawn to kind of medical imagery, that kind of thing, scientific imagery and historic. I don't know, there's a feeling there in the historic imagery, but overall the sort of scientific aspect of it, I think it has something to do with, for me, the fact that science is supposed to be like the rational, the logical, way of ordering things, like ordering the chaos, the mess. And, I like playing with that. I mean, because like I was saying, a lot of what drives my art is like a desire to be understood. And when you're looking at like sort of scientific medical imagery as, this is a logical language, this is a way of presenting things, of ordering things, it was a good framework for me to start from. And then also to, like I said, question and subvert even that framework through the work. Because, I mean, the way that science and medicine and, the establishment is supposed to order things, it imposes an order, but, is that really a fact, or is it just, an imposition, a projection of order?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. From your own
those are the kind of things that I like to think about with the work.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So when you were looking at these images from Charcot,
Mm-hmm.
and his studies of
Oh, yeah.
hysteria, what was your impetus for that? Was it, for
So
personal?
much. I love hysteria. I just love reading about it. For me, hysteria is a way, or was a way, I guess it still is, a way for men to sort of pathologize femininity and female sexuality. When you have Jean-Martin Charcot, and he was doing these images of hysteria, like he had an idea of, what is a hysterical woman? What is hysteria? And he wanted to document it. So he basically had these women who had no real agency of their own. They were inmates in a public hospital, come in, and he would, direct them to sort of, perform hysteria for him, or his idea of hysteria, which itself is like a made-up disease. So there's just sort of like layers and layers of projection and performance in response to expectations that I found really interesting, and I wanted to play with that for myself. And particularly, I've always seen identity as a performance. Like in all of my work, that's a thread that sort of ties it together. And I've only recently found out that not everybody thinks that. Like, I guess I've often felt sort of depersonalized, and that my identity, at least, is performed in response to other people's expectations. And like, so there's like a different me for every person that I interact with, and maybe every individual interaction with, the same person. And so their performance, ties into how I felt, my own performance. And what is that in response to, and what expectations am I trying to meet? And then, what expectations am I then trying to break out of, or trying to subvert or defy? So that was, I think, the base of it. And this is work that I made again like 20 years ago. So
It's a long time.
yeah. But I think that's where I was coming from with it.
Okay. So are you currently making art still?
Not especially, sadly. I would love to say that I have, a thriving art practice. But after I did my MA, my master's in art, I went on to start a PhD in Aberystwyth. But I had kind of like a nervous breakdown. And since then, I've unfortunately felt quite alienated from my own art practice. Right. So I've been more focusing on like my health and my family. I mentioned in my email, I've been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis some years ago. And so I've been, just trying to keep it all on an even keel. And I've been doing a lot more craft work. Like I do a lot of fiber craft now, spinning, knitting, that kind of thing, which is very meditative for me.
Right.
But actually, I'm hoping that this, because this has made me, really think about my work again, might be sort of the thing that starts to maybe break down that, art block that I've been having for the past decade or so.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm certainly hoping that it does, because like I say, those works that we exhibited, I think it was 2002, something like that.
I made them in 2002 and the
Okay,
exhibition was 2003.
three, yes,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
You know, looking back on that work, I'm really struck again by the power and the intensity, and especially, you know, when you're talking about that whole idea of identity and the politics of identity, and it's such a big thing right now.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah, very
it,
much so.
as part of our
Mhm.
sort of contemporary dialogue, that now would be a good time.
Well, I hope that it resonates with people.
Great, great. So, you know, you say you're working with more craft-based
Hmm. Yeah,
practice right
some
now.
fiber
Yeah,
stuff.
I see
I'm
that.
writing all
Yeah.
my stuff.
So it's not like you've been idle, that's for sure, in terms
No,
of
yeah,
activity. That's great. Yeah. Well, we might check in with you some other time in the future when
yeah.
we've got more to discuss about what's going on in your pictorial life, I guess.
I sure hope so.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to thank you so much, Hazel, for sharing this time with us, and thank
Oh,
you for
no
sharing these
problem.
images with us. And we will be chatting with you soon, I hope.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.